This work is a literary allegory and satire themed around the theological concepts of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, such as Hester, Panim, and Gilgal. The descriptions within the work are not intended to affirm or deny specific religious doctrines, nor are they intended to demean the victims of historical tragedies. Please read it purely as a creative work depicting the extremes of religious thought that desperately attempts to defend the omnipotence of God. Righteous Theology, the Omnipotent God. At the heavenly seat of judgment, aged administrators sit overseeing thousands of years of history. To them, the tragedies and madness unfolding on earth are nothing more than an unavoidable computational process for God to derive the solution of ultimate salvation. The pieces now lined up on the board are truly well-honed tools. One of the aged administrators pointed to the first piece sunk to the bottom of history. Once there was a man named Squanto in the wilderness of North America. Though a native of the Patuxet tribe, he was abducted by white men, forced into slavery in Europe, and forced to learn English before returning to his homeland. In 1620, the Pilgrim Fathers who washed ashore in Massachusetts were on the verge of annihilation from starvation and disease. Without this Squanto, they wouldn't have even survived their first winter, and American history would have ended there. The settlers defined this man who understood English and taught them everything from planting corn to catching fish, not as a neighbor, but as a convenient slave whom God had pre-positioned for their survival, even putting him through hell to do so. They sucked every bit of survival wisdom out of Squanto, and as soon as they became self-reliant, they drove him and his brethren to the frontiers and usurped their lands. In 1622, Squanto met a mysterious death, with records suggesting that the food offered by the settlers was the cause. Afterwards, the settlers fabricated the myth of Thanksgiving and positioned themselves as those chosen by God. As generations passed, that arrogant logic that it is the natural right of those chosen by God to trample over the unnecessary and expand their territory became systematized as manifest destiny, becoming the justification apparatus for eliminating indigenous peoples from this land. Ironically, the method the settlers later wielded against the indigenous peoples was smallpox-laced blankets, a means that mocked the very lives Squanto had once saved. From God's perspective, this was an efficient initialization to build a new order. The arrogance of fabricating the kingdom of God upon the sacrifices of others began here. 2. Executor of judgment, the whip of purification named Adolf. Next, the old man turned his eyes to the memory of blood-soaked massacre, Adolf. Here, the old man quoted the righteous theology delivered in a sermon on August 5, 2000, by the former chief rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef. Why was this man able to serve as a messenger of God? As Yosef asserted, the 6 million victims of the Holocaust were reincarnations of souls that had committed sins in past lives, Gilgal, being sent back to earth to atone for those sins and be purified. When the people break the covenant, God temporarily withdraws his protective power from the world. This is Hester Panim, the hiding of the face. It was not the absence of God, but rather God intentionally allowing evil to run rampant. This is because admitting that the Nazis were stronger than God would mean the collapse of faith. by interpreting that even the Nazis were merely a whip wielded by God, God's omnipotence was protected. The good or evil of the tools is meaningless in the face of the computation. And now, in the center of the board, two leaders named Trump and Netanyahu are immersed in the euphoria of moving history with their own hands. They are convinced that they are ruling the world. However, their true nature is nothing more than an accelerator to advance to the next stage. The more aggressively they act during the era of the hidden face and forcibly try to maintain their nations, the more the stage is set. They believe their own decisions will bring victory, but in reality they are merely creating the perfect environment for God to let the cleaner, Iran, do its job. 4. Cleaner of purification, the routine operation named Iran. The dark shadow approaching from the other side of the board, Iran. The old men dispassionately observe the spectacle of them destroying Israel's infrastructure and paralyzing their payment networks. Iran dismantles the nation built by the hands of insolent humans. From a human perspective, it is ruin, but from God's computation, it is the razing to the ground process of the Tower of Babel built upon taboos. Trump and Netanyahu soil the stage, and Iran burns everything down. This very chain of agonizing cries is the shortest route to purging impurities and drawing in true salvation. 5. Disposal of the massive scaffolding, the heavy machinery named America, and the United States of America, which carried all these functions. This nation, which used up Squanto and rose upon the sacrifices of others in the name of manifest destiny, was also merely utilized by God as heavy machinery to transport cargo to its destination. Now that its function has been fulfilled, all that remains is collapse. Respect paid to an empire that has finished its role does not exist in God's computation. America, too, just like the indigenous peoples of the past, has reached its turn to vanish into the darkness of history by the very means it wielded against others. Conclusion: the march of hollow kings. In the earthly news, kings shout of their own historical missions, and the masses alternate between joy and despair over it. However, the old men in heaven concluded thus while sipping their cold tea. They too are working quite well indeed, without even realizing that they are merely primers to mobilize Iran, the messenger of God. Squanto is used up as a slave, Hitler is swung as the whip of purification, and America finishes its duty as heavy machinery. The moment the stage is completed, they too will be erased from God's memory, for the fate of a tool is, in any era, the eternal silence that arrives after it has been fully used up. The old man quietly closed his eyes, as if he had finished the computation. There, only the hollow cries of the kings, proud of being pawns, echoed.